would be honored if you would join us.
Greetings and welcome to another YouTube episode of Film Stories with me, Dan Cooper. Today we are time traveling back to the 90s to what I think is one of the single best films of that decade. It came along right at the end in 1999 and it happens to be one of my favourite films of all time. It's the first in a kind of loosely related 3-episode arc that I'm going to do. It's Being John Malkovich. If you haven't seen Being John Malkovich, then you really are missing out. You should probably stop this right now. Watch the film. Thank me later in the comments or otherwise, and then come back and listen to this. I'm not going to do spoilers, but I think it's the kind of it's a film that whatever you're doing, you should drop everything and see. So what makes it such a unique movie? It's an incredibly art house movie. It's zany. It's wacky. It's incredibly clever. It marked the first collaboration between auteur Spike Jonze and really individual kind of voice, or an auteur as well, I suppose, in the sense that Charlie Kaufman, as a screenwriter, writes screenplays that are undeniably his voice. If you've seen Adaptation with Nicolas Cage, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. And this was a really difficult sell. The story of the real-life actor John Malkovich having a portal, which gives someone direct access to his brain. The portal can be accessed from the seventh and a half floor of a historical building, and a puppeteer kind of discovers this by accident and then exploits it monetarily before everything gets really strange and really wacky. It was just really almost an impossible sell. And yeah, when Kaufman wrote it, he was really trying to he was writing for TV at the time, TV sitcoms, and he was really trying to just kind of make Hollywood sit up and notice. He thought the project was unfilmable, but he wanted to write it anyway. He wanted to write something that would get him out there, get him noticed. So he wrote it as a spec script. He knew that there was no way that you would, in the 2 minutes that you get to pitch a boardroom of executives, he knew that there's no way that they would go for it, they wouldn't get it, so he just hammered it all out, wrote it as a spec script, and began to pass it around Hollywood, and it made some waves. I mean, every single person, an executive he showed it to, said, it's unfilmable, it will never get made, but it's a great script. So it served the purpose that he wrote it for, which was to get him in the room, to get him into conversations where he could then pitch other ideas. He never believed for a moment that it would actually get filmed, and it's really been really interesting research looking into this film, because pretty much everyone who's been interviewed about the creation of it said, I never thought it would get filmed. And then one day it kind of did, through one of those bizarre twists of fate. It found its way to Francis Ford Coppola, the legendary director, who gave it to his daughter, Sofia Coppola, who was in a relationship or very close friends, quite unclear at that point, with Spike Jonze. That was in 1996. Sofia Coppola and Jonze were going to marry in 1998. Jonze, of course, was famous for being considered, I suppose, an auteur of music videos. He'd made truly groundbreaking videos for the Beastie Boys, for Fatboy Slim, amongst many others, and he was interested in directing a feature film. And when he got hold of this script, he fell in love with it. But it proved really difficult to finance because studios just weren't interested in it. It was just too bizarre. In fact, when New Line Cinema were just one studio that were looking at it, and they just said no. And the executive, reportedly, who dumped the project, said, why can't it be Being Tom Cruise? Because it was just seen as too out there. The storyline and the fact that the John Malkovich was the title character wasn't seen as a big enough draw in Hollywood to garner interest for what was a really oddball project. So eventually, the film kind of managed to find its backers largely through Single Star Productions, which was an independent film production company co-formed by Michael Stipe, the lead singer of R.E.M., and he was instrumental. Again, a big fan of the script. He's quite an oddball guy himself, and clearly saw something in it. and he managed to kind of put together funding, and they co-produced with Propaganda Film and managed to put together a 10 million budget. And I remember at the time hearing an interview with Michael Stipe on BBC Radio 1, this is going back to the late 90s, and he was talking about the film coming out, the film being in production, and he was asked, well, have you ever thought about acting? And he said that when they were struggling to get Malkovich to accept the role, and we'll come back to that, he was asked at one point, well, what about being Michael Stipe? And he seemed genuinely petrified at the thought of it, and it was a daunting prospect, because whoever took on that lead role, whether it would be Tom Cruise, Michael Stipe, John Malkovich, they were putting themselves in a bit of a no-win position, and that's the point. But why Malkovich was originally quite reticent to take up the role, because he talked about directing it at one point when he first read the script, but he wasn't so keen to take up the role as himself, or as a kind of alter ego of himself, because put simply, his argument was simple: if it's a bomb, your name's forever associated with it. He said your name's in the title, and you are the person that people will always remember. And if it's a success, then you've kind of created, I suppose, like a living meme of yourself that people can always be snarky or ironic about, and it might be hard to escape the shadow of that. So he was reticent, but again, reportedly, Francis Ford Coppola was quite useful in swaying him, and eventually the film had its title character. The rest of the cast came together pretty quickly. John Cusack had apparently asked his agent for the most bonkers script that he could find. He said, "Bring me a script that just makes no sense." He was clearly after looking to try and do something completely different, and thus, being John Malkovich, landed on his lap, and he went for it. Catherine Keener, who memorably played Maxine and took the part. She didn't really want the part by all reports. She didn't feel that it suited her at all, but she desperately wanted to work with Spike Jonze, and so she accepted it and would go on to be nominated for an Academy Award. Cameron Diaz, again, Jonze said he didn't want Diaz at first because she was too kind of pretty for the role of Lottie, who of course is a quite a character who doesn't have the kind of natural good looks that, and I suppose which is why she's so envious of and admiring of Keener's character Maxine. But Diaz really wanted to get into work with Jonze. Keener was an advocate for her, and so eventually Jonze let Diaz read and was impressed by her versatility, by her generosity as an actor, and just they put her in all kinds of makeup until she was virtually unrecognisable as one of the most beautiful actors in the world. Other things changed. The 10 million budget wasn't enough to film the original ending, which was, if you think the film itself is bananas now, go online, have a read at the original ending. I won't tell you all of it, but it included Malkovich being controlled by Craig, the battling giant Harry Truman puppet for total puppet supremacy. I never thought I'd say those three words together. With the great Mantini, who features in the original film quite early, but then disappears. But he would have been a bigger part of the finale would the original ending have been shot. Lottie would have fallen in love with Elijah, the chimp, who helps her out in the film's final third. That would have turned into a full-on romance. And the devil was in it too, and Malkovich ultimately takes over the entire world with the devil at the helm. It's really, really, frankly nuts. It sounds amazing, but it got scrapped for budgetary reasons, and the film instead became something more human, I suppose, in its ultimate execution. The shoot itself was completely harmonious by all reports. The only thing, an interview with Rolling Stone, Malkovich said the only thing they really disagreed over, him and John Jones, was that he wanted Charlie Sheen to play Charlie Sheen instead of Kevin Bacon playing Kevin Bacon. If you've seen the film, you'll know what I'm talking about. There's a few Hollywood actors that turn up as fictionalized versions of themselves, and Kevin Bacon was scheduled to play himself within the film, but Malkovich wanted Charlie Sheen, and it worked out really well. Malkovich also said that he wanted paille curls, kind of the Jewish hair curl rolls, and Spike Jonze vetoed that. But apart from that, I mean, when the creative differences are that small, that really is a pretty harmonious production. Backers weren't so pleased. Things weren't quite so harmonious there, as Jones was sending the rushes off from the first few days of shooting. They were scenes shot in Craig's apartment, which, if you remember, is quite dark. It's underlit, low-key. And the backers, the financiers, were quite unhappy with the footage. They also weren't happy that Cameron Diaz. They thought they thought that Jones had secured the services of Cameron Diaz, who was then really hot stuff at that point. She was really on the way up in the ascendancy. Her star was rising, and then they'd kind of made her almost unrecognisable. And so the backers were really quite unhappy and actually demanded, according to Spike Jones, that cinematographer Lance Bangs, who'd worked with Jones forever, was sacked. And Jones stood his ground, and it didn't happen. And then eventually they got onto the shooting the more comedic, lighter 7.5 floor stuff, and the backers were assuaged. Their doubts were assuaged when they began to see some of the more comedic, lighter stuff. Anyway, Universal, the propaganda films who were making the film alongside Single Cell were sold by Universal during the production process, and what that meant for being John Malkovich was that Jones and his crew actually got kind of left alone because the studio didn't have the oversight. They were in the middle of a sale, and this film just kind of got left alone, and they were free to really pursue their artistic tendencies as far as they wanted to, which I think you can really see watching the film, that this is a film that is without doubt largely free from studio interference, and all the better for it. It also meant, according to Jones, that they got triple the editing time that they expected, and they were really given that time to just let the film breathe, to find the film in the edit, and so much of that is evident on the screen. In terms of reception, Roger Ebert called it the film of the year. Said it was the best film of the year, and like others, he couldn't believe that it didn't get a Best Picture nomination. It did get 4 of the nominations. I've mentioned Catherine Keener's already, in terms of money, it got a total worldwide gross of $32 million, which tripled its production budget, and almost most successfully it did that whilst almost retaining completely those art house sensibilities, which really in Hollywood is a rarity indeed. So that is my take on my look back at Being John Malkovich, a film that I absolutely adore. Next week I'll be back with a film that is loosely associated with it and also happens to be one of my favourite films. But that's another film story. Don't forget that you can purchase Film Stories magazine right now by following the links below. You can also catch Simon's podcasts at any good podcast provider. You can find us on Twitter at filmstories.pod. You can find us at our website at filmstories.co.uk, and you can find us on Facebook at Film Stories Online. It's been a pleasure. I'll see you back here next week for another film story. Bye bye.